You're listening to a podcast from the South China Morning Post.
Hello and welcome to the China Geopolitics Podcast. I'm Finbarr Bermingham, the Europe correspondent here at the South China Morning Post. It's a scorcher in Hong Kong. Summer has hit early and the aircon is dialed up to 11. But we might need to moderate that in the future. The big news this week is about climate, and more climate, and the global efforts to stop it from rising. Joe Biden held his Earth Day extravaganza on Thursday, joined by 40 world leaders from 6 continents, including China's Xi Jinping. This marked a remarkable turnaround since the Trump era, and a reminder of the US's renewed push to form coalitions on just about everything. John Carter and Zhou Xin will, as ever, be with me today to discuss this big issue, plus a curious episode involving former Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao writing about his mother that raised eyebrows in China and abroad, plus a renewed push by British lawmakers to force the government's hand on issues related to Xinjiang. Buckle up. Joined on Friday afternoon here by John Carter and Zhou Xin to discuss the week's events. We're going to lead with the climate talks which happened overnight in the United States. Well, they were held virtually, but they were hosted by the Biden administration. We saw the US make commitments to double what they'd previously committed to cut from their greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. They're now going to cut, or aim to cut, 50 to 52% compared to 26 to 28% below 2005 levels under the Obama administration. Xi Jinping, of course, attended the talks and he discussed China to meet peak coal use by 2025 and to moderate new coal-fired plants. Zhou Xin, what was your sense of this? There wasn't really that many massive announcements outside of what the United States had done, but I suppose it was one area that we saw China and the US at least sharing a stage and at least sort of cooperating in a way.
Oh, yes, Finbarr, that's a very interesting point because as we all know, Beijing basically kept the cards to its chest until the last minute. Everyone's saying almost like a month ago, Joe Biden has already said, I have already sent an invitation to President Xi Jinping, President Putin, but I don't know whether they will show up or not. And Beijing has been refused to confirm or deny whether President Xi will be at the summit. But at the end of the day, with Kerry in Shanghai for the 2 or 3 day talks, and then everyone seems like, okay, China and the United States have at least, they can agree on something. And President Xi showed up at this event and also laid out China's plans and also stated China's policy statements. I think that's, in general, a very positive sign. But of course, behind these official statements, and Joe Biden is trying to put the United States back as a leader in global climate change, and China, of course, does not want to be shown that China is led by or is following the U.S. President Xi Jinping has already made it very clear that China's climate change efforts is made for the purpose of China's own contribution to the humankind and also for the eternal development of the Chinese nation itself. So we are going to see there are from both sides, there are willingness to cooperate. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we can see there's lots of hidden tensions behind the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, I wanted to ask you about your views on the significance of this. It's something that we couldn't have imagined happening last year. If President Trump was in office, this would never be happening.
No, not under Trump.
Didn't even believe in climate change, but, by all accounts.
Right. No, it's a sea change, if you will. Pardon the pun. In the attitude towards climate change and what that you have to do something about it and do something about it soon. The level of these commitments were even under Obama, as you noticed, Biden has doubled the commitment. So this is picking up speed, picking up momentum, and it appears it's going to be one of the big things in the next couple of decades. In furtherance of what Zhou Xin was saying, China wants to be a leader in this whole movement, and it already is in many ways. It is the world's largest producer of solar panels. It is the world's largest producer of new energy vehicles and is likely to have more new energy vehicles than many countries have cars at all. And so it is at the forefront of this movement, and it remains to be seen going forward how China cooperates with the rest of the world in this regard.
Yeah. This is a big question. I'm wondering, and you may both have thoughts on this. When I think about people often saying that China, this is the climate is one area that China can collaborate with the West, with the European Union, with the United States. And I wonder to myself, how can you collaborate on one area when you don't trust each other in any other area, like in terms of sharing technology, sharing intelligence? And I've seen some people who know far more about this than I do over the past week saying that just this mutual recognition of where you need to be in terms of the targets, the pressure on each other to not sort of be seen to be doing less than the other. It's almost like the opposite of mutually assured destruction in a sense, John.
It's policy decoupling, if you will. You're decoupling the whole climate change debate from other more contentious issues like human rights and Taiwan and so forth. We'll see. It is a huge problem, and it needs to be addressed, and I think everybody agrees on that. Most agree on that. It's with Kerry, John Kerry, Biden's climate envoy, went to China, and by all reports had a very successful talk there. I go back to 2014. China and the United States did reach agreements on climate change, which led to the Paris Treaty on climate change. Without that agreement between the U.S. and China, who were even at that point the two largest emitters in the world, there probably wouldn't have been a Paris climate deal. So it can happen. It has happened. There is precedent. Will it happen in the future? We'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. Zhou Xin, just to turn to you very briefly before we move on from the climate issues, we saw the Koreans vow to stop financing coal overseas, something that there's pressure on Japan to do as well. China's often been criticised for exporting coal-related projects around the Belt and Road and so on. Is that something you could see maybe China addressing further down the line? Would it be an immediate priority, or what do you think about that?
Well, I think President Xi has made some promises at this meeting, saying China will be pay attention to the coal plants. But I mean, every project has to be taken in historical context, right? For instance, in many parts of China, in northern parts of China, the coal has been the only source of energy for the last hundreds of years, possibly, and just 10 or 20 years ago, it's not uncommon to just walk into any northern Chinese city, and you see like every household and every factory, every compound is burning coal. So China has already made a long way in terms of cutting the coal consumption, or at least cutting the waste for coal consumption. If you're in Beijing in the 1990s, you will see in the winter every the rickshaws with the piles of coal crossing the alleyways, crossing the hutongs. But now this has been largely disappeared, and this sign has been disappearing in many cities. And now of course we still have lots of so-called coal-fired power project. But if you look at even if you look at the smoke, and usually it's black. Now it's possibly white or a little bit gray. Okay, so since I already
not quite white smoke just yet in China.
that's for sure. But I just want to give the impression that China has now made a commitment. But there are lots of technical kind of technology issues and also institutional issues to be solved before China can move to that ideal situation. I'll give you one example. For instance, in northern China, especially in Hebei, Beijing 2 years ago in the winter, Beijing was really determined that we must reduce all coal consumption. So we have to shift coal to natural gas. But China's natural gas supply or the facility has not been in place. So this is a huge social and political problem. Millions of households are freezing.
People freezing to death.
In the winter. This kind of issue, if you were the Chinese government, of course you have to factor in. Say yes, I can shut down this coal-fired power project. But what else? Is alternative ready now? So these kind of issues, I think the Chinese government has to factor in its climate change plans.
Yeah, domestic politics also. It's going to be a factor for every country that's signing up for this stuff, John. I noticed after Joe Biden had made his pledge to double commitments on emissions, you had the Coal Mining Institute or associations or whatever in Virginia and so on coming out to criticise him. So with all of these global pledges, people have to be very smart with how they deal with it domestically too.
Of course. I mean, these are vested interests, and as Zhou Xin pointed out, they've been vested interests for a long time. And so you need to overcome that domestic opposition and come up with viable alternatives, which may require subsidization, retraining of workers, and other plans. And I think that is, as I understand it, is part of Biden's infrastructure plan, is to finance the green revolution and retrain workers to work in manufacturing and to work in other areas, both related and unrelated to the green drive. But we'll see. Again, a lot of America's electric power is, like China's, burned with coal, although increasingly those plants are being shut down. This is the big challenge everywhere. Eastern Europe is heavily dependent on coal still.
Germany, even after decommissioned the nuclear plants.
Well, and they're decommissioning the nuclear plants, would make it even more difficult, where China is building more nukes. And America is switching to natural gas because of shale oil and gas. There's a lot of new gas coming online. One of the reasons China may be reluctant to proceed more rapidly with decoalizing its economy is it has a lot of coal, and so it has secure supply, where natural gas, most of that is going to have to be imported from Australia, from the United States, from elsewhere. And that is an issue.
Through the South China Sea from the Gulf.
Yeah,
just to open another can of worms there.
Yeah.
There's a lot of politics at every level of this story. I want to go a little bit inside baseball with Zhou Xin here to talk about an interesting story we saw during the week involving the former Chinese Premier Wen Jiabao, who has published a personal reminiscence about his late mother, which appeared in a Macanese newspaper, presenting his mother and himself as people tested by hardship and uncorrupted by power. Zhou Xin, what seems on the face of it like quite a touching and heartfelt tribute, made waves in China, and it didn't escape the sharpened knives of the censors either. Why is this controversial for the uninitiated?
Well, this is a very interesting topic. I think there are lots of over-interpretation into the censorship of this article. I think there was one rule in China that, as a former state leader, if former Premier Wen is going to publish his memoir, he has to go through certain institutions, because the Communist Party have a total control of the narrative of the past. And imagine if he, as one of the former state leaders, can publish his memoir, whether we should allow Bo Xilai and Zhou Yongkang to publish their accounts of the historical events, or even not, there are 9 members of the former Politburo. Are the 8 members being equally entitled to do this? This is quite interesting, because when the New York Times publishing this very controversial article about the family wealth of Premier Wen, by that time I think 2 lawyers representing the Wen family has sent kind of clarification to Hong Kong newspapers. But this is also very controversial, because the logic is like this. Okay, for now, there's foreign newspaper, there's US-based newspaper, make some allegations about the personal corruption of a Chinese leader, and the Chinese leader responded.
This was in 2013?
2013, yes, something like 24. But will this become a standard practice? How about there will be a next, newspaper, a second newspaper, have a different story against a different state leader? Will that state leader do the same thing? Or if that didn't happen, then was this a kind of tacit confirmation of the reported contents? Yeah. So it's a very I would say this is more complicated than in the Western democracies.
Sure.
Every former politician just to publish their own memoirs.
But it was seen also as a veiled attack, maybe or veiled criticism rather than an attack, maybe of the leadership. Is that accurate?
No, I can't read implications from that. Anyway, this is a very well written, very personalized memorial of his mother. And then in the implication of it, of course, there are some kind of implications that my family is always clean, because my mother always taught me to be clean, never take anything that is not mine, not even a cent. This kind of message. But of course, when writing this story, you have no evidence. You kind of just make a phone call to Premier Wen and say, "Do you mean, are you trying to imply you are not corrupted?" And then if you try to establish these, say, this article about his mother is actually, is actually the surface. The real intention is try to defend his fame. Then you need some hard evidence to support that. But unfortunately, we cannot have these kind of evidence.
Yeah.
The best we can do is just reading reading the tea leaves. But again, this is where become opinion pieces.
This is so much of what covering Chinese politics is these days, is reading between the lines and trying to decipher whether there's a hidden meaning because nobody's really saying anything publicly.
Yeah, exactly. You can't say, the story included a line saying, "I hope China will be a free country," and then, it's kind of anti-Xi slogan. That's a little bit far-fetched.
Yeah, interesting nonetheless. We'll see if there's any more fallout from that. Overnight, we just wanted to touch on something that happened in Britain. We talked about ways in which maybe Western powers and China can work together. This is certainly not one of them. There was a non-binding vote in the UK Parliament overnight, in which a small group of MPs declared that genocide is taking place in Xinjiang. This is obviously a very touchy subject. Chinese embassy today came out with an extremely strongly worded statement to try and to say this was not the case, that they said genocide is not happening. But these things keep happening, and it shows that despite us discussing at the top of the show areas in which they may be able to work together, John, there seems to be so many areas in which they are coming apart at the seams too.
Well, this is just the latest declaration by a Western government of declaring what's happening to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang as genocide. I mean, the Dutch Parliament, you have the Canadian Parliament, you have top U.S. officials all saying that. And so in a way, momentum is building, but where does it go? The two largest economies in Europe, Germany and France, have not made any such declarations. So you could argue that there's a split within Europe. I don't know that it's that severe, but the point is there are those who are willing to take very strong positions and those who are going to be more pragmatic and work with the Chinese. And that seems to be that debate within Europe, it seems to be going on at the moment. And we'll see what happens. But this is despite this controversy surrounding Xinjiang is a key sticking point at the moment between the West and China, and it raises the question of, can you separate that from, say, climate change, or are they commingled?
Yeah. It's interesting to talk about the pragmatism in certain parts of Europe, and just to clarify, there in both the United Kingdom, in Netherlands, and also in Canada, the governments there didn't back these. So it's Parliament saying this. It's not actually the governments. I think the governments are trying to walk a finer line. They don't want to go down this road because they realise it would probably be a catastrophe commercially.
This is it.
Cause another wave of sanctions or something like that.
Yes.
But to return to the point of pragmatism, we also have seen this week the German, the race for the next Chancellor of Germany heat up. The CDU has named Laschet as the candidate. We've also seen the Green Party name a very popular candidate and surge in the polls. So we may see Beijing's best friend in Europe, Angela Merkel. We're going to see her leave in September, and there may be a sort of shift in how that is. And I just want to ask Zhou Xin, in terms of how China has viewed Merkel, she's always made a point of visiting China once a year. 12 years out of 15 years she's made the trip. China's losing its number one ally in Europe, and how much of a concern is it, I guess, what might be next? They don't know what's next, but what may be around the corner.
Well, if the Lasching was being the next, I think China would a little bit at ease, because that's something Beijing can has at least it's predictable for Beijing. But I mean, for the role of Merkel, of course, departure of Merkel for the Chinese government, it's a big loss in Europe. And I think John will have much more to say about Merkel than me.
Well, she definitely was a friend to China. But be clear, China industry, particularly the car industry, is heavily dependent on China.
Germany's. Yeah.
I mean, last week, Daimler, the maker of Mercedes-Benz cars, reported its results, which were better than expected, largely or almost entirely because of better sales in China. Everyone wants to drive a big Mercedes S-Class limousine. So,
oh Lord, won't you buy me a Mercedes-Benz?
Yes.
So the Beijing and the Shanghai street can be more crowded.
Exactly. So whoever is chancellor is going to come under pressure from from German industry to be friendly with China because they send a lot of exports there. It accounts for a lot of jobs in Germany. And so it's very important. Now, one interesting fact about Germany is this idea that the Green Party is coming up in the world and that CDU-CSU their support is falling. Green Party support is rising, and the prospect of a coalition government between the conservative CDU-CSU and the Greens. What does this mean? What are Green Party policies? Obviously, the Green Party is very environmentally focused, and does that help the push?
Human rights as well.
Well, also human rights, and how does this play out? Merkel was a force in her own right. She was the leader of Europe, and everybody acknowledged that. And now she's leaving the stage, and so who takes over? Does anybody have the gravitas that she had in order to lead the conversation about global issues, including China?
Yeah, quiet gravitas.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's going to be fascinating to see. We're also sort of seeing pockets of populism and so on popping up all over Europe. So I think it's not just Germany, it's a bit of a shift. I just wanted to finish up with something that I noticed. Last week on the show, we discussed the Beijing Olympics. The potential for boycotts was obviously topic of conversation. We also talked about Beijing's concerns or maybe how would they cover somebody who protested on the podium if they wore a T-shirt about Hong Kong or something like that. Just this week, on Thursday, the IOC announced that athletes will be banned from protesting on podiums and the field of play at the Tokyo Olympics and the Beijing Winter Games after recommendations from the Athletes Commission. That would be a little bit of greeted as good news, I'm sure, in the quarters of power in Beijing, Zhou.
Oh yes, I think Beijing has kind of this very good skills and expertise in handling situations like this. So even some people are very determined to make a political statement. I think the Chinese government know exactly how to manage this. And that said, this is why the whole Tesla thing is so interesting. Yeah. One normal consumer, doing a protest against Tesla, and the video being clipped by hundreds of millions of times, and they are on and on follow up with the state media led by Xinhua News Agency, and then also all the Beijing kind of administrators, regulatory agencies following on and almost directly ordering the local regulators say, you must look into this, must reopen the books to investigate the case. Mm-hmm. This is so interesting. I don't know the end game, but it sounds so unusual.
Yeah. We'll hear more about that further down the road. For now, John Carter, Zhou Xin, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this week's China Geopolitics podcast with me, Finbarr Bermingham. We will be back next week. Until then, wash your hands, keep your distance, wear your mask. You know the drill. All the best.
As critical news stories emerging from China continue to shape lives and business around the world, the weekly SCMP Global Impact newsletter brings you expert analyses and insights on the economics of COVID-19, society, technology, and the environment. Sign up to receive your weekly email at scmp.com/newsletters.